Hello friends, we are going to deal with a very interesting poem today, the poem written by John Donne titled A Valediction forbidding mourning. Now this poem is immensely popular. I think it is one of the most popular poems of John Donne, the metaphysical poet. Now John Donne is classified as a metaphysical poet, and he is the greatest among them. He lived from 1572 to 1631. He was a contemporary of Shakespeare, and he lived during the time of Queen Elizabeth and also into the Jacobean period. He was a great scholar, a person with an astute and inquiring mind, and somebody who was very observant and interested in everything that went on around him. And all his scholarliness and his knowledge and his gift for language, his keenness in observation can be seen in his poetry, and that is why he is considered to be the greatest or the most representative of the metaphysical poets. Now in another video I have spoken in detail about metaphysical poetry, so I'm not going into particulars now. But just to give you an idea, metaphysical poetry is the kind of poetry that deals with philosophical, religious and spiritual and even with topics related to love, but then all in a different way. Different in the sense, different from the contemporary style of the Elizabethan poetry. And because those days poetry was preoccupied with the love and intrigues of the court and adventure and battle and all such things. So Donne's poetry and the poetry of people like Herbert, Henry Vaughan and Richard Crashaw. So the poetry of these people, and again another name to be mentioned in this group is Andrew Marvell. Their poetry was quite different from what their contemporaries wrote, and those days people found that their poetry was a little too complicated, that they are kind of artificial in their poetic diction and in their style, and they were not very popular. It was later on by the efforts of T.S. Eliot that metaphysical poets once again came back into the limelight. And now metaphysical poetry is a part of English literary canon. You take any book that talks about poetry, an anthology of poetry, definitely you will find a metaphysical poet there, and most often it is John Donne. Now this particular poem that we are dealing with, it has some of the features or some of the very special features of metaphysical poetry, because it borrows images and ideas from various branches of learning. That was something that is special about metaphysical poetry. They used to talk about science, they used to talk about astronomy and about geography and everything in poetry. You can see that in this poem. And then he also uses in this particular poem what you would call the metaphysical conceit. You have a standard example of a metaphysical conceit in this poem. We'll talk about it in detail when we come to it. Now the title, A Valediction forbidding mourning. So he is actually addressing this, John Donne is addressing this poem to his wife, okay, Anne More, and he was to leave her and go off to some faraway place, and maybe he was going to be away from her for a few months, because those days transportation was not as easy as it is today. So if they go off, especially if they go off across the sea to Europe, it might take months or even years for them to come back. So we can imagine that it is such a situation where he is going away from his wife, and both of them are upset, and she is almost going to cry and burst out into tears, and he pacifies her, he consoles her, saying that no, don't cry, don't mourn, rest assured in the fact that our love is so strong that even though we are apart from each other, we will still continue to love each other. Our love is not going to be diminished by the distance that is going to occur, the space between the two of us. So that is what is the theme of this poem. He comforts his wife, his desolate wife, who is so upset about his going away, and tells her to just wait and bide by the time. He will soon be back and their love will remain intact. So that is the theme. Now let us look at the poem, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning. Now this poem, it has 9 stanzas, and each stanza 4 lines each. The rhyme scheme is AB, AB, and each line, the meter here is iambic tetrameter. Now let's see how, let me just read the poem once to you, the whole poem. Though it is 9 stanzas, it's not very long. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, while some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now, and some say no. So let us melt and make no noise. No tear floods, nor sigh tempests move, to a profanation of our joys, to tell the Laity our love. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant. But trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. Dull sublunary lovers love, whose soul is sense, cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. But we by a love so much refined, that ourselves know not what it is, inter-assured of the mind, care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. Our 2 souls therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. If they be 2, they are 2 so, as stiff twin compasses are 2. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. And though it in the centre sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Such wilt thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun. So that's one beautiful poem. So let's take it stanza by stanza. The first stanza. So you remember the occasion. Okay, he is trying, this lover is trying to comfort his lady love. He's telling her not to cry, don't make a show of our sorrow. So this is what he says: as virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, while some of the sad friends do say, the breath goes now, and some say no. So he begins by giving us a comparison. He tells us, when virtuous men die, they pass mildly away. So virtuous men are men, wise men, okay, wise, W-I-S-E, wise men, who have understood the meaning of life and death. They would be ready to face death. They will not cry or make a fuss or exhibit any sort of fear when death approaches. They would be very tranquil. They would, with great equanimity, await the arrival of death. So when such a virtuous man is lying, awaiting death, his soul would pass very gently away. There would be no noise, there would be no hue and cry. So even the people who are, like when a person is nearing death, surely there would be some people around him, his friends, his relatives, his close family members. They would be there keeping him company, awaiting whatever is going to happen. And so he says, when virtuous men die, their souls will pass or leave the body and go so softly that even the people who were sitting there around him, next to his bed, looking at him, even they will not be able to realize that he is dead, that the soul has left him. It would be so silent. The passing would be so soft, so gentle. So that is what he says there. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go. So it is as if they just whisper to their soul and say, okay, it's time to go. You can just leave. Don't make any noise. So that is how their death would come. While some of the sad friends do say, the breath goes now, some say no. So the people who are sitting around and looking keenly at them, some would say, I think the soul has left him. The others would say no, because we don't see any sign. He seems to be so calm. So now this, it's quite an unlikely comparison, but he says, this is how we should behave. I am going to leave you, but we are not going to make any fuss. Just like the soul silently, gently left the man, the virtuous man, similarly, I will be leaving you. So let us not make any noise. That's why he says the next stanza, so let us melt. So let us melt in the sense, let us blend together. Or you can also say that melting means disintegrating into small particles. So I go my way, you go your way. No noise, no kind of loud reactions, nothing. Okay, so let us melt. And make no noise, no tear floods, nor sigh tempests move. So usually you hear about when lovers separate, you talk about people, the lovers crying so much, flooding the whole place with their tears. And no sigh tempest, sigh is the sigh that you heave out of your sorrow. So tempest again is a storm. So he says, let us not create any floods with our tears or tempest with our sighs. He's actually making fun of all these conventions about how lovers, when they part, they should essentially make a noise, make everybody aware of their sorrow at being parted from each other. And so he says, let us not do any of such things. No tear floods, nor sigh tempests move. To a profanation of our joys, to tell the laity our love. So he says it would be an insult to our happiness, to our joys, to our love, to tell the laity. Laity is common man, ordinary people. See, our love is something very special. Let us not make it very cheap, kind of vulgar, by crying and making a lot of noise, by telling everybody about what we feel. Let us keep it to ourselves. So that is why profanation. Now what is something profane? Is something unholy, something that is humiliating, bad. So it would be an insult to our love, to the happiness that we derive from each other, to inform or to announce our love and our parting to all the people around us. Nobody needs to know, just you and I. A very cozy picture, isn't it? So laity here, as I told you, means common man, ordinary people. So he considers their love very, very precious, very, very pure, elevated from the rest of the world and the lovers, the other lovers. And he continues that idea throughout of their love being something very, very special. And then he gives more comparisons. He says, moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant. But trepidation of the spheres, the greater far is innocent. So see, this is exactly why this is called a metaphysical poem. Because he brings in very unlikely comparisons. Because who would compare the parting of two lovers to the death of somebody? That is what Donne does here. And again, look at what he tells us. He says, when the earth moves, that is when an earthquake happens, it brings a lot of harms and fears. There is panic, there is so much of damage, buildings are destroyed, people are killed, so many things happen, people become so panic stricken. And after an earthquake, men reckon what it did and meant. So after an earthquake, people discuss for many days, for months on end. You might discuss about the earthquake and what happened in that place, what happened in this place, who died in the earthquake, which building was damaged, and what is the meaning of this earthquake. Does it foretell a greater disaster? So all that happens when an earthquake happens. But there is a greater movement that is happening in this universe. And what is that? The trepidation of the spheres. Those days, in the 9th and 16th centuries, they had this idea that they were around the sun, that they were 9 globes, or the planets, which used to move in elliptical circles. Okay, so again, so in that movement, now we know that in the solar system, we know that the earth, we have all studied about the rotation and the revolution. So the earth is constantly going around. At the same time, it is also going around in this elliptical path, or its orbit. So he says that though the entire sphere moves, in the sense the earth rotates and revolves, yet no movement is felt, because it's such a big move. Because we know that every day it is because the earth rotates that we have night and day. But have we ever felt the motion of the earth rotating? If the earth were rotating, and if all of us were rotating along with it, would life itself be possible? No. So the motion is so fast that we are not aware of it. And so that is what he means here by saying the trepidation of the spheres. Okay, so what he's saying here is that petty things like earthquakes, it affects everybody and everybody discusses it. Whereas really big things like the rotation of the earth or the revolution of the earth, nobody notices it, because it's such a greater movement, it's such a big, it's of such an immense magnitude that we are not even aware of it. So again, you can see that comparison of how he keeps on telling us that his love is greater than the love of all the other human beings. His love for his lover is something very, very special. It is higher than the love of all these ordinary mortals. So you can see that. That is why this comparison. Next stanza. Dull sublunary lover's love, whose soul sends, cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. Now again, he's carrying forward the same image of base love and elevated love. He says sublunary lover's love. Sublunary is below the moon, that is earthly. Okay, so lunar, relates to the moon. So sublunary is below the moon, which otherwise means earthly. So he too, of course, is an earthly being, but he seems to forget that. And he says all the others are sublunary, earthly lovers. And what is wrong with their love? Their love is whose soul is sense. They cannot admit absence. Means all the others, their love is merely physical. Sense here means physical, something that is subject to touch and sight and all that, something that can be perceived only through the senses. Such lovers, the love of such lovers cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. Because absence removes one person from the presence of the other. The body goes away, isn't it? So when one lover is parted from the other, distance separates them, and physically too they are apart. So base, vulgar, physical love will be affected by absence, because this love, it survives on constant sight, and it survives on the touch, it survives on bodily pleasures like hugs and kisses and physical intercourse. So if that is not there, what will happen to this kind of love? It will just disappear. After a few days, if you don't meet your lover, you will forget him or her. That is why he says, dull sublunary lovers love, whose soul is sense, or whose love is very, very physical. They cannot admit absence, because absence removes those things which elemented it. Absence removes the physical body, and it denies opportunities to touch your lover, to enjoy the pleasures of the body, to see your lover, and as a result, such love diminishes with time. But now he goes on to the next stanza and he says, but our love is not like that. Ours is a more refined and elevated love. But we, by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is, assured of the mind, care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. So the love of the two of us, that is Donne and his wife, it is such a refined love. And he says, oftentimes, I myself cannot really explain the kind of love that we have for each other. That's why that ourselves know not what it is. Assured of the mind. So their love does not depend on their body, but it is a love that has brought their minds together. It is a mingling of their minds. It's a blending of their minds. That is why assured of the mind. They love each other on a very kind of a spiritual kind of terms. It is not physical. So they don't care. They care less for things like eyes, lips, and hands to miss. You know that eyes, lips, and hands are very important in love, because you see your lover, you kiss your lover, you touch your lover, all that is there. So he says, since our love is a love of two minds, two hearts, two souls blended together, we don't bother, even if we don't miss eyes, lips, or hands. Our two souls, therefore, next stanza, our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. So he says, now again here he brings in a conceit, a metaphysical conceit, and he says, our love, when we go apart, when we move away from each other, it will not endure a breach, because our souls are one. And though I must go away from you, there will be no breach. Breach means a gap or a break or a kind of a distance between the two. That will not happen. But what will happen? There will only be an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. Now you know that the metal gold has one speciality, that you can beat it very thin. Unlike gold is a very malleable, you call it malleability. It's a very malleable, a very flexible metal. That is why gold is used to make ornaments, because you can use you can make intricate designs. You can shape it into thin strips. You can make it into very thin plates. So he says, our love is like gold. Gold, when you beat it, the more you beat it, it spreads, it doesn't break. So there again you can see the comparison of the ordinary love. Physical love, the moment you don't see your lover, you start forgetting her or him, and your love starts decreasing. But their love, the love of Donne, it is so refined, it is so great, that, and it's so enduring, that the more it is beat, in the sense maybe they are away from each other, so the more they suffer, it is beat into a thin sheet, but it doesn't break. It spreads and spreads. That's why he says there is an expansion and not a breach. Now this is a metaphysical conceit where love is compared to a sheet of gold. And then he says, if they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. Now here comes the most popular example of a metaphysical conceit. He compares the souls of these two lovers to the two legs of a compass. If they be two means if these lovers are two. Earlier in the stanza that went before, he said the two souls are one, and so nothing can separate them. If they are beat, they will only expand. Now he says, now if you insist on saying that the two people are two different souls, let it be so, but even then, he says, they are joined like the compass, like the stiff twin compass. And here the compass is the mathematical compass that you use to draw circles on paper. So here you know that there is also the other compass that navigators use to show the direction. It is not that compass here. It is the stiff metal or wooden compass made to draw circles. So if they are two like the two legs of the compass. Thy soul, the fixed foot. And so he tells his wife, his lady love, that your soul is the fixed foot, because when you draw a circle, one, you press it firmly onto the paper, onto the center, and the other foot moves around, isn't it? And so here too, your soul is the fixed foot, because you are remaining here. I am the one who is going away to another place. So you are the fixed foot. And this fixed foot makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. So this leg that stands firm in the center does not move, but only if the other one moves, this one moves along with it. Along with it in the sense it stands here but leans towards the other one. And though it in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. So he says the fixed foot, or the lady's love, the lady's soul, it remains in the center, it is fixed there, and when the other one moves too far, what does this leg do? It leans after it. You know that when you draw a circle, if you move the other leg too far, this one will also tilt along with it. And so that is why he says that when the other one, who is the other one? It is Donne, or the male. If he moves too far away, this fixed leg would slowly lean and bring him back. And again it will become erect when the other one, the wanderer, when he comes back, once again this foot will stand straight. Such wilt thou be to me, who must like the other foot obliquely run. So he says, you my love, you my dear darling, you are this firm foot for me. Such wilt thou be to me, who must like the other foot obliquely run. So I have to run because I have so many things to do, I have to travel, so I will move around, but you are going to be that fixed foot. Thy firmness makes my circle just and makes me end where I began. So he says, it is because you stand there firm and steadfast in your love that I am able to draw a full circle. That I am able to draw a full circle, he means that I will come back to wherever I left from. I went away from you for a certain purpose. Your steadfastness, your love will bring me back to you, and it would make me end where I began. So it will not leave my circle incomplete. I will come back to you. The same point where I left, I will come and join you. So don't worry at all. So this is the way he consoles her. He tells her that as long as our love for each other is strong, as long as we continue to care for each other, nothing is going to pose an impediment. No matter how far I go away from you, no matter how long I am away from you, I will come back to you. Rest assured. Be confident in the strength of our love. So isn't that again a wonderful comparison? And those days, in the time that John Donne lived, this must have been a very strange comparison, because that was a time when love was romanticized. Lovers were compared to flowers and swans and doves and all that. And here is a man who came and said that love is like a compass. And my God, what would have been the natural reaction of the people then? They would have thought that this man is crazy. That is why metaphysical poetry was not very popular those days. But then when we look at it, isn't it very, very commonsensical? Isn't it a wonderful comparison of love, and of how one person standing firm, the other going around and coming back, and of how their love is the center point that keeps both of them together, that keeps both the legs united, that doesn't let them go asunder. So that is how he comforts his wife and consoles her. So that is what happens in this poem, A Valediction forbidding mourning. He's not just telling her simply don't cry, but he's giving her very convincing reasons, and he has a very strong rationale for justifying his love, because he is very confident about his love for her. And in real life too, his wife is Anne More. He fell in love with her. She was the niece of John Donne's master and of his patron. And this love relationship was not at all supported by the others, but then he took her away. But they continued to be in love. Their life was not easy. He fell into poverty. They had to undergo a lot of difficulties. But in spite of all that, he continued to love her till her death. And it is later that he turned, and I think it is maybe after her death or some later date, that he turned to religion. But as long as she was there, he continued to love her and she continued to love him. So he seems to be talking from his own experience. Okay, so that is what is this poem is all about. This firmness of love, the steadfastness of love, the truth of this very true love that these two people shared, and the very strong bond that they had for each other. And now when you try to analyze this poem, we saw that there are many comparisons right from the first stanza. He gives us a lot of very strange comparisons. He compared the parting of these two people to the parting of a soul from a virtuous man's body. And then he told us how he gave us another comparison, a very unlikely comparison of the earthquake and the movement of the earth, of the planet. And he said how one is very ordinary. It creates a lot of trouble. It makes everybody realize when an earthquake comes, everybody knows about it. So he says our love is not like that. Our love is like the movement of the planets. Nobody even knows that it is moving. So we don't need to announce our love to others. Only we need to know about it. And then the love of other people is very physical, and it all depends on the senses of touch and sight and all that. But ours is the union of two souls. So nothing is going to happen to our love, even if we are away from each other. And then he compared it to gold, of how our love will keep expanding and expanding. The more trials and tribulations it is subject to, it will grow stronger. Like gold which is beaten into airy thinness. And then again the classic metaphysical conceit of lovers being compared to compasses. Now here, this comparison of the compass, today, if you look at it and if you read it from a feminist point of view, many of you might have objections to this comparison of how the female is expected to be this one foot that is fixed in the center, whereas the male can roam around. So the idea that a man can go wherever he wants to, a man can do whatever he wants to, the woman has to remain faithful. Because in this poem, firmness means faithfulness, loyalty. So it is as if the woman is expected to be loyal, The woman is expected to be faithful to the lover no matter what he does and where he goes. He might go around, wander around, have fun. He might have relations with others, but she is expected to stand here and wait for him, pine for him, like you have in all the stories of Ulysses and Penelope. Ulysses went around, but Penelope was the ever faithful wife. You have in Indian mythology, you have Satyavan and Savitri, where he went around but she was steadfast. So a feminist reading might question this comparison and say that this is not right. But then again, we need not look at it that way. Of course, you can look at it. That can go for your further study. If you are interested in giving that kind of an interpretation, yes, of course, you're free to. But just looking at it in the plain, giving you a very plain kind of an interpretation, this is what the poem means. And so all that I have attempted to do is to give you an entry into the poem, and I leave it open to any kind of interpretation you would like to do. So I guess that's all I have to say about this wonderful poem, Valediction, Forbidding Mourning.